welcome to the first Reformed and Charismatic podcast of 2024. So just getting off of the Christmas and New Year's break. I took 2 weeks off just to spend time with family. It was great. Took it off from work, took it off from podcasting. So it's been really relaxing. Christmas, we had our Christmas Eve service at church, which was fun. Then just hanging out with the family. And then New Year's, we got to actually travel to Monterey, which is where my in-laws live. So we got to go visit them over there, which is fun. The beach is over there, got to be on the coast, got to see family over there. And yeah, so now recording a podcast and back to work this week. So it'll go back to a little bit of normal. So for today's episode, I wanted to talk about a topic I've been wanting to discuss for a while. I just thought it was interesting. But it's about so the question is for this topic is, was the Apostle Paul married? And the mainstream thought is no, that he was single. And they believe this because in First Corinthians 7, some of the translations say to like the single and the widows, that he wished that they would remain as he has, or remain single as he has or is. And so everyone's always taken that, as like Paul was married or Paul was single. And it's a big push for like single Christians, that and along with Jesus. But I saw somebody post on Twitter that there is another theory out there, and some of the church fathers actually agree with this, is that Paul was married. And, some people will say, yeah, Paul was married because um, he was at one point it was all expected of all male or Jewish males, especially like Pharisees, that they would get married. Like you had to be married to be a Pharisee. But then maybe his wife like died off or maybe left because of persecution when he converted to Christianity. And so he was single after that. Well, this argument is that he was single even while he was a Christian and serving the Lord. And so I'm going to just pull up this thread here and we'll just discuss it. And yeah, we can just see where we land after that. All right, so let me pull it up. All right, so this brother's name is, well, his Twitter name, Potama Potos. I don't know how you say that. But I'm going to just go ahead and read here. I think it's like 6 or 7 tweets in the thread, and then we'll kind of discuss it as we go down. All right, so it says, St. Paul was married, but many don't know this. A little thread. Both St. Paul himself in the New Testament and the earliest apostolic tradition is clear that St. Paul was married. Yet many are unaware of this, as the later tradition, championed by zealous ascetic monks, buried this earlier scriptural and apostolic tradition. Apart from the fact that Jewish men following divine precepts married so as to raise up sons, and multiple, St. Paul himself also indicates his marital status at least twice in the New Testament. First, 1 Corinthians 9:3, he defends himself against adversaries, viewing him as a lesser apostle, claiming his own apostleship as equal to that of the others. Hence, he enjoys the same privileges as they do, such as bringing along their wives, as St. Peter had done. One we also know was explicitly married, Luke 4:38 through 40. Yeah, so here I got the Bible verse pulled up. So this is where we get that Peter was married. Luke chapter 4, verse 38. It says, here we go. And he arose and left the synagogue and entered Simon's house. That's talking about Jesus. Now Simon's mother-in-law was ill with a high fever, and they appealed to him on her behalf. Okay, so yeah, so it mentions Simon, who is Peter's mother-in-law. So that's how we know that Peter was married. All right, so let's go back to the Twitter thread. All right. Likewise, in Philippians chapter 4, verse 3, St. Paul greets his wife. So I'm going to pull this up right here that he's mentioning this. Again, Philippians chapter 4, verse 3. So I'll start in verse 2. I entreat Euodia and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Yes, I ask you also, true companion. So that's who he's pointing to, that he believes is Paul's wife, the true companion. Help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. So the true companion, and no one really knows who this true companion is. So we kind of just write it off as somebody extra, but this argument here is that it is his wife. So back to the Twitter thread. Likewise, in Philippians 4:3, St. Paul greets his wife, and in the Greek text, in the vocative, this literally means, in quotes, the person yoked together with. For example, his wife, whom he has been yoked together with in holy matrimony. The term is also commonly used to mean spouse. All right, so while this is the next thread here, or next tweet in the thread. While some might insist on translating the verse differently, the earliest apostolic witness is clear. St. Paul was married, and this verse did refer to his wife. Our earliest witness is St. Clement of Alexandria, who, interestingly enough, was removed from the Roman martyrology in the 17th century. He comments in his work, the Stromata BK36, that St. Paul was married and that he also greets his wife in Philippians 4:3. After Clement, Origen also refers to the same tradition as Clement and writes in his commentary on the epistle to the Romans, saying, in quotes, Paul then, if certain traditions are true, was called while in possession of a wife, concerning whom he writes in Philippians, I ask you also, my loyal mate, help these women. So that's and then his commentary on Romans chapter 1, he refers to certain traditions revealing their status. So again, no one really knows who this true companion is, but according to Clement and Origen, this was Paul's wife. All right, as things passed on, moving on to the later centuries, the find that Eusebius, the famous church historian with access to all the wealth of ancient patristic literature, in parentheses, indeed, many works survive only in part because they were quoted by him, also concurs and passes on this. So this is also concurs and passes on this ancient apostolic tradition. So here's a screenshot of Eusebius. I, Clement, indeed, whose words we have just quoted after the above mentioned facts, gives a statement on account of those who rejected marriage of the apostle that had wives, in quotes, or will they, says he, in quotes, reject even the apostles? Question mark. For Peter and Philip begat children, and Philip also gave his daughters in marriage. And Paul does not hesitate in one of his epistles to greet his wife, whom he did not take about with him, that he might not be inconvenienced in his ministry. All right, so here is the next tweet in the thread. Objection. Some might say Paul couldn't possibly have been married because he says in 1 Corinthians 7:8, in quotes, but I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain even as I am, end quote. Okay, and here's his answer. This refers to Paul traveling around alone without a wife, hence why he had to underscore that he did so out of expedience and not by necessity. For example, 1 Corinthians 9:3, where he states explicitly that he does have the right to bring along his wife, though he doesn't make use of that right always, so as to allow himself to focus solely on the ministry of the gospel. This, he hopes, would also be embraced by other men and women who, in the absence of a wife, could allow themselves to devote their resources and time exclusively to services of the gospel, as many women and widowers did, serving as deacons. All right, so here's the other passage, 1 Corinthians 7:8. All right. So this is Paul. I'm going to go ahead and just start from verse 1 down so we get a little more context for it. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Now, concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man to have sexual relations with a woman. Oh, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourself to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, as a concession, not a command, I say this: I wish that all were as myself am. But each has his own gift from God, one of a kind, one of one kind, and one of another. And then here in verse 8, to the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. But if they cannot exercise self control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So you might think, okay, this seals the deal, right? It says it in verse 8 right there, to remain single as I am. But not all the translations actually say that word for word. So the New King James and the NASB translate it like this. So here's verse 8, and this is the NASB. But I say to the unmarried and to widows that it is good for them if they remain even as I. And the New King James translates it pretty much exactly like that. So this brother here in this Twitter thread is saying that he didn't bring along his wife on ministry, on the mission that he was on. So let's scroll down again. So let's see. I stopped right here at the bottom of this one where it says, "Indeed, he also admonishes that those who have wives should be as if they had none." 1 Corinthians 7:29. Why is that? He answers later that the married life is one of many cares, and he thus exhorts the married not to get lost in their duties and responsibilities, but always as the unmarried make God their greatest focus. St. Chrysostom explains this beautifully in his 14th homily on the first epistle to Timothy. In quotes, "For marriage is not an impure state, but one of much occupation." He speaks of their having leisure, not of being more pure by remaining unmarried. For marriage certainly implies much secular agreement. If you abstain from marriage, that you may have leisure for the service of God, yet do not so employ that leisure, it is of no advantage to you if you do not use your leisure to perform all services to strangers and to the saints. If you do not thus, you abstain from marriage, not for any good end, but as though you condemn the state of marriage. So the virgin, who is not truly crucified to the world by declining marriage, appears to condemn it as accursed and impure. So that's homily 14 on 1 Timothy. And then he says, "It is not good for a man to be alone, nor is it good for any to denigrate holy matrimony in a confused over eagerness to praise holy virginity." All right, so for me, I don't know. I mean, this was like big news to me, right? Because that verse in Philippians 4:3, where he says "true companion," we have no idea who he's talking about right there, and he's saying to like help with some of the women in that church, which would make sense if he's telling his wife to help out. And if he didn't bring her along, that would make the case that he's saying like, why don't we as apostles have the right to do that? As Peter does, because it sounds like Peter did take his wife along with him. But the First Corinthians 7:8, where he says to the widows to remain unmarried or to remain single or to remain as that is a little, I don't know. That's a little closer to, I think, a pretty clear message. So I don't know. But we do pretty much think that Paul was married at one point and maybe then his wife deserted him when he became a Christian, or maybe she died, um, before he did. So, yeah, I don't know. I lean more to being that Paul was married, but I do think this is interesting. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll post this Twitter thread too in the description of the video, so you can take a look at it yourself. Again, let me know what you think. Thanks for joining me on this first podcast of 2024, and yeah, well, I'll see you at the next one. All right, God bless.